Hello. Yes. I would like to hear something more about the thinking process. There is a Rig Veda expression that the mind is a good tool, but a poor master. And the I, the true I, as I've heard here, is the knower. So then I cannot think. I'm not a thinker. But as a separate self, I use the mind tool to think. But I've already also heard on the YouTube that you say that there is no thinker between the thoughts. So when I, as a separate self, think I'm true or believe I think when I want an answer on a question, I have a thought about what I'm going to have for dinner. Then I have a conversation with myself, fish or meat, potato or pasta, and then at the end there is a solution, what I'm going to do. And then I'm feeling that I have a thinking process. But is it correct to say this, that I, the true I, is just knowing this, but the separate self is working with the mind as a tool and thinking, or is it just, is the answer of the question, or is the answer finished before the question? So it's, I could at the start say fish and potato. Is it just a game, or can you say something more about this thinking process? Who is doing what?
Okay. Let's use the analogy of the dreamer's mind and the dreamed character in the dreamed world. Yes? So, all there is to the dreamed character's experience is thinking, sensing, and perceiving. But the knowing out of which the dreamed character's thinking, sensing, and perceiving is made belongs to the dreamer's mind, or it is the activity of the dreamer's mind. So there is no real entity called the dreamed character. The dreamed character doesn't have its own discrete, independent existence. There is no separate self there. There is no real person there. The dream character is simply a temporary localization of the true person, the dreamer's mind. Yes. So, as an activity, the dreamed character is not a problem. On the contrary, the dreamed character is the means through which the dreamer thinks, senses, and perceives. What is a problem is when the dreamed character forgets this and believes and feels that it is a discrete, independently existing self or person. In other words, the ego, the separate self, the dreamed character, is not a problem as a process or an activity. It only becomes a problem when it believes and feels it is an entity. Now, the equivalent of the dreamed character in this analogy is each of us. Each of us, this bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving, is the activity of infinite consciousness. It is we are a localization of infinite consciousness that enables infinite consciousness to think, sense, and perceive. As such, we are the agents of creation, of creativity, of manifestation. What we are only becomes a problem when we forget this little bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving, forgets that its sole reality is the knowing of the dreamer's mind, and it believes and feels that it is an entity in its own right. I am a separate self. I am a person. I am independent. The knowing with which I know my experience lives in and is generated by, and it therefore shares the limits and destiny of my body. Then the person becomes a problem. The person, the separate self, the finite mind, the ego, becomes a problem. It is a problem only when it believes it is an entity, a person or a self. So it is not a person that does the thinking, sensing, and perceiving. The person is the bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving. We tend to think it is I, this person, that does the thinking, sensing, and perceiving. No, this person is simply a bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving. There is no separate self located in this bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving. This bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving is made of the knowing, which is infinite consciousness. King Lear is the activity of John Smith. He is not an entity or a person in his own right. So as long as this is understood, feel free to think, feel, sense, perceive, act, and relate as much as you like. Only all that happens is that the thoughts and feelings that depend upon the belief I am an independently existing self cease arising. And as a result, our activities and relationships change.
Yes. We are so conditioned, so even if I work with this, it's still the feeling that it feels like I'm thinking.
It's true, we're conditioned. This bundle of thinking, sensing, and perceiving is conditioned. But what we are doing here is part of our conditioning. And we are being reconditioned here to think and feel and subsequently act and relate in a new way. What we are doing here is not outside of our conditioning. Each of our minds has chosen to come here this weekend precisely because it wants to be reconditioned to a greater or lesser extent with what is being suggested here. Why? Because each of our minds has tasted the suffering that is the inevitable consequence of its old conditioning.